Hello and welcome. In this session, we're going to look at the API Wizard AR Invoices loader. In Oracle, AR invoices are broken into three components. There's the invoice header, which is the customer, bill to, ship to information, purchase order, salesperson, date of the invoice. The second component are the invoice lines. Those are the details of the invoice, the items that are being invoiced, or the credit memos or descriptions of what's being invoiced. And the third component are the distributions. That's the accounting for the invoice lines. In API Wizard, we've structured the loader in the same way with three sections. The first section, which you can see on the screen under the blue column headers, is the invoice header. So here I'll just highlight some of the fields of the invoice header, including the transaction type, the ship to information, the bill to information, and then if I scroll further to the right, we have salesperson information, purchase order number, date information, payment term information, and so forth. So that makes up the invoice header. As I scroll further to the right, under the peach column headers, we have the line details. So these are the invoice lines. And the invoice lines include an invoice line number. They include the memo and description, or an item if it's an inventory item, and then a quantity, unit price, and extended price. And then finally, we get to the distributions. In most cases, you'll leave the distribution information blank. In that case, Oracle AR will determine the accounting for you using its auto accounting capability. In the situation where you need to override that or pass some different accounting, you can do that by passing the values as shown in the examples that I've highlighted. A few things to note here. In the invoice line section, you'll see that we pass the invoice number. You can set up an API Wizard formula to auto number them for you. Also, you'll see that there's an extended amount field. The extended amount field can either be manually entered, or you can enter it with an Excel formula, as you see that I've done here in the formula bar. Or you can set up an API Wizard formula in the formula row, which will automatically apply a formula for you. So that's up to you in terms of what you think is the easiest way to work with it. Also, please note that there are three parameters in the header. There's the org name parameter, that's actually the operating unit. There's the batch source, which you can pick from the LOV. Any of the fields that say LOV mean that there's a list of values enabled, and also the transaction currency. One thing to note is that the API Wizard AR invoice process is using API Wizard's table type functionality. Table type functionality is used when we've got a multi-tier structure like an invoice, and we want to send all of the information up at one time. So meaning all the information, meaning for a given invoice, we want to pass the invoice header, the invoice lines, and the invoice distributions all up in one shot. So the way that we do that is we use the keyword end. And the end keyword in the upload column tells API Wizard that that is the last row of an invoice. So you'll see that in rows 17 through 20, which I've highlighted, I have a 4-line invoice, and I can see here the four lines, 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the upload column, I'll have a yes value for the first 3 rows, and then an end in the 4th, and that tells API Wizard that that's the last row of the invoice. So it'll process that all together in one shot. In rows 20 through to 22 through 26, I have a 5-line invoice, and you'll see I have yes in the first 4 rows, and then end in the 5th row. And same for the other rows down below. The rows with the green here are just for demonstration purposes. They're not needed. I can create reference rows, which we call these reference rows in API Wizard. I can create a reference row by putting a dot in the upload column, and then any information I type in any of the fields is just there for my benefit or your benefit as we look at this. But we don't need these here, and we could certainly delete these rows if we didn't want to see them. And there's no requirement that you put any breaks between the invoices. When we're ready to process, we hit the execute button like we would for any API Wizard process. API Wizard recognizes that there are 24 rows to process. And once we run this, it's going to realize that those 24 rows actually turn into 5 invoices. So when we get our confirmation from API Wizard, we'll see that it'll say 5 records were processed. In this case, 5 invoices. All right, so I'm going to say yes. And you'll notice that the data will be processed one invoice at a time. So you'll see all of the records in a particular invoice turn to blue in one shot because it's all going up to Oracle at one time. 5 records were processed. That means there were 5 invoices. They were all successful. So I'll hit the commit button and save. And I'm done. So that easily I've loaded those 5 invoices. If I come to my output section here, you'll see that it generated invoice numbers for these. If I wanted to see the detail of an invoice number, I can just pick that number. I can just grab that number. So I'm going to just copy it. And I'm going to come to my invoice details sheet. I'm going to paste in that number, 502774. I'm going to double click on the title of the report, and it refreshes the report and shows me the lines, the quantity, unit price, line total, and then the total amount for the invoice. If there was tax on this line or on this invoice, that would be displayed as well. So this gives me a quick way to look at my invoices without having to log into Oracle. You can do other AR invoice reporting in API Wizard, but here we're just focusing on the AR invoice loading process. One other thing that I'll mention here is you'll note that when I create the AR invoice header, I only need to put one row. So for instance, in this first example, I have one row and the bill to customers general technologies. For my second invoice, again, one row, and again, the customer's general technologies. For my third invoice, you'll see the bill to customers Silicon Valley. Again, I only need to enter that row one time. If you're copying and pasting data from another source and you'd like to pass the header row multiple times, that is, you'd like to pass the header record once for every time you're passing a line for that invoice, you can do that. That'll also work. So for example, if I were to just highlight all of this data here at the header level, this works equally as well. So it doesn't matter from an API Wizard standpoint whether you pass the header record information in one row or if you pass it in all the rows. It works the same. So you can easily copy and paste the data in. And also if you're copying and pasting, obviously you're not going to have these little delineations between the invoices. And those are not needed either. So whoops, I wanted to delete. So there we go. So again, you can keep the data in whatever format makes it easiest for you as you're processing this. The key is just to remember that you do have to pass the end word whenever you're at the end of an invoice. That again tells API Wizard where one invoice stops and the next invoice starts. Okay, so that's an overview of the AR invoice process. Just a few other things to keep in mind is that you can easily remove fields that you don't need. So for instance, let's say that you don't pass salesperson information. You can hide the sales rep number and sales rep name fields just by highlighting the columns and using the hide option in Excel. If there's fields that you need to add, you can do that. So as an example, flex fields might be something that you'd want to include at the header level or at the line level. So you can easily add those fields just like you would with any API Wizard process. Okay, I hope this overview has been helpful of the API Wizard AR Invoices process.